Mention the name William Charles Frederick Grover to most motor racing enthusiasts and it will mean nothing to them. Yet he was the most successful pre-war English racing driver of all, winning the French Grand Prix twice, the inaugural Monaco Grand Prix, the Belgian Grand Prix and the Le Bourg Grand Prix on 3 occasions, all at the wheel of Bugattis. His real name is relatively unknown because he raced under the pseudonym Williams or W. Williams. This started as a means of avoiding his parents finding out that he was racing motorcycles a few years after the First World War. William Grover, nearly always Willie to his family and close friends, was born in Montrouge, Paris in 1903. His father was an Englishman and his mother French, and William was brought up in France, originally in Paris, but the family moved to Monaco at the start of the First War. Frederick Grover, Willie's father, had moved to France originally with the Russian Prince Trubetsky, for whom he had worked in London, where the prince was working as a diplomat at the Russian embassy. But he was always a great enthusiast for horses, and Grover worked for him as a groom and horse breeder. When Trubetsky was moved to the Paris embassy, his English horse expert went with him, where he met and married a Frenchwoman and settled in France. In 1914, William was sent to live with relatives in Hertfordshire and grew up to be a fluent speaker of both English and French. At some stage in the 1418 war, he also learnt to drive, and after the war he worked with his father as a chauffeur de grande remise, a contract driver of luxury cars. By the early 1920s he was racing an ex-military motorcycle, but keeping it secret from his family. Clearly this is not the racing machine, but his sister Alice looks happy enough in the sidecar. Obviously money was available to purchase these machines, although their source is unknown. William's career in motorsport moved on to cars, and in late 1925 he bought a Type 35 Bugatti, but it is not clear how that was financed either. He also owned an H6B Hispano Suiza. Possibly it was one of the contract hire fleet, which he entered for the 1926 Monte Carlo Rally, seemingly a somewhat unwieldy car for such an event, but nonetheless he finished 5th. The Hispano is seen here passing through Evian-les-Bains on its way to Monaco. Clearly it is a large luxury car and seemingly unsuited to sporting events, but despite being considered by many to be the best luxury car of the vintage period, its 130 horsepower engine gave it a fine turn of speed despite its weight. Note the expensive Stefan Grebel lights. The second picture shows that he also used the car for hill climbs, and although this picture has been attributed to the Monte Carlo Rally, it is clearly at a different event. Possibly it's the Mont des Moules hill climb, which followed the Monte and which Willie won in 1926. The car is carrying competition number 33, not 7 as it was in the Monte Carlo Rally, nor does it have the rally plate on the radiator. The long trip to Monte Carlo completed, Williams then entered a number of hill climbs with his Type 35, and we are left to wondering how a young man of 23 afforded an Hispano and a new or nearly new Grand Prix car. Wherever the money came from, Willie soon started making a name for himself behind the wheel of the 35, and he won the 2-litre racing car class at a hill climb at the Côte de Mi-Corniche near Nice in February 1926, setting a new record for its class. The following day he took Mount Argol by storm, setting a new class record at 11 minutes 56.2 seconds and finishing just 2 seconds behind Benoist in the 6-litre Delage 2 sprint car to win the 2-litre racing car class again. Later in the same week he took second in class at the Course de Côte de l'Esterel. From these 3 hill climbs it is clear that Willie was a naturally talented driver who, completely new to motor racing, an amateur in a new car, he was able to compete with the best. His first circuit race was a Grand Prix. Can we imagine such a thing happening today? But he entered the 2-litre Type 35 in the 1926 Grand Prix de Provence at the Circuit de Miramas near Marseille on the 28th of March. While many other countries were finding motor racing to be in the doldrums, this was far from the case at Miramas. There were 43 entries spread over 5 capacity classes for the Formula League race. There was a 10-lap qualification heat for each of the classes and 16 qualified for the final. The number from each class depending on the number of starters in the heat. In the 2-litre class, all 4 Bugattis qualified, without greatly needing to exert themselves, but the strongest competition in the final would come from the Works Talbots in the 1.5-litre class. At this time the rules did not discriminate against supercharged cars, and the Talbots with their blown engines had 108 horsepower against the Type 35's 90. The Talbot's advantage may not sound very significant, but it was actually 20%. Here is W. Williams, the name he used on his entry in the unblown Type 35, having temporarily abandoned his signature back-to-front cap for a helmet, but this was not a practice that he continued with. From the start it was clear that the Talbots were quicker on the straights, and Berlier led from Seagrave and then Williams, the Bugatti making ground in the corners. Seagrave went ahead on the second lap. On lap 5 Williams stopped at the pits for a tyre and dropped back to 10th place, but after rejoining he drove a brilliant race, and by the 10th lap he was up to 5th, behind the 3 Talbots and Chiron's Bugatti. This was probably the best ever race at Miramas circuit, and by the 26th lap Williams had passed Chiron and one of the Talbots to move into 3rd. He later moved up to 2nd and was closing on Seagrave, and 5 laps from the end he was just 8 seconds down, but then Lady Luck intervened and he suffered a burst tyre resulting in a pit stop which dropped him to 3rd place, 3 minutes down. This exciting race was marred by endless confusion by the timekeepers, and Williams was originally awarded 2nd place, but despite that failing it had been an excellent race for the rookie. Williams had made up time in every turn, and without the 2 pit stops he might well have won the race, and he certainly looked happy with his 3rd place. His winnings amounted to 4,000 francs in total, which converts to around £1,600 today, which would not finance his lifestyle for long. It is therefore something of a mystery that for the next race outing the Type 35 had been replaced by a 2.3-litre Type 35T, and this was entered at the Spanish Grand Prix at San Sebastian. On slippery roads he again drove well and was at one stage in 3rd place, but dropped out with valve problems and exhaustion. Unlike today's Grand Prix, the race was over 5.5 hours long on rough, almost unmade roads, and as this picture shows, even in town the surface was poor and slippery. Also of interest is the rudimentary spectator protection, consisting of chestnut paling fences, and the temporary spectator bridge to stop them crossing on the track itself, with soldiers guarding the bridge to stop pedestrians standing on it to watch the excitement below. Williams completed his first year as a racing driver by driving 2 cars at a hill climb in November at Gommetz-le-Châtel, a course south of Paris. Here he is seen competing in the 1500 touring car class in one of the Type 35s built for the Touring Grand Prix, and this may be his first drive in a works car. The course was a 1 kilometre straight, almost an uphill sprint, which he completed in 52.4 seconds. He also ran his Type 35T in the 3-litre racing car class and was fastest in class at 36.4 seconds. By the end of 1926, Williams had certainly established himself as a driver with the qualities needed to become a star. By today's standards, his quiet, rather shy personality would not fit in well in the media frenzy that is modern motor racing, but in the vintage period it made him a man of mystery, reserved and enigmatic. Nonetheless, he could promote himself, and clearly soon came to the attention of Ettore Bugatti. But before he had fully established himself as a works driver at Molsheim, he was offered a drive with the Anglo-French Talbot team for 1927. For the Grand Prix de Provence in March, having entered his Bugatti, Williams actually appeared in the 1.5 litre supercharged 8-cylinder Talbot, but having finished second in his heat, just 1/5 of a second behind Morisot in what was a stage-managed race, Talbot chose to withdraw from the final, leading to the most amazing scenes ever witnessed at a Grand Prix, with the race abandoned after the incensed crowd invaded the track, overturned one car and set it alight. At Montlhéry in July, Williams led the first lap, but then retired from the Formula Libre race in the V12 4-litre Sunbeam. He then finished fourth in a lacklustre French Grand Prix, driving the 1.5 litre supercharged Talbot again, behind the 3 cars of the Delage team. Here is a youthful looking Williams posing for an official photograph in the 1.5 litre Talbot at Montlhéry. The Grand Prix was to be his last race for the Sunbeam Talbot Direct team before he returned to Molsheim as reserve driver for the Bugatti team at Brooklands for the British Grand Prix. When Caberto Canelli ran out of fuel due to a carburetor problem, he pushed the car over a mile back to the pits to repair the fault and refuel. But he was totally exhausted and he could go no further, so Williams took over the car and drove to 6th place, but was not classified. The start of the British Grand Prix shows the Delages, which totally dominated the race, getting away on the left, but being out-accelerated by Malcolm Campbell in his Bugatti number 5. Whilst the Works Type 39As are towards the right, with cars 10, 11 and 12 being Canelli, Materassi and Chiron. After the field sorted itself out, the 3 Delages were never headed, and Canelli was the fastest of the Bugattis until his problems intervened. The British Grand Prix was held at the beginning of October, so it was the end of a successful season for Williams, and he was back at Bugatti where he would stay for the rest of his career. When his results are inspected, it is clear that he did far less events than many of the other top drivers, and his success rate would further improve in 1928. January 1928, and once again Williams started the year by entering his Type 43 in the Monte Carlo Rally, starting this time from Brest. The lady in the passenger seat appears to be Yvonne, although at the time she was Sir William Orpen's mistress and favourite model. The trophy is probably for the Mont des Mules hill climb run after the rally. Williams started the 1928 racing season with the Grand Prix d'Antibes, having failed to appear with a new Type 35C at the Circuit de la Riviera near Cannes, possibly because it wasn't ready in time. At Antibes, the Type 35C performed well and he finished second behind Chiron. It is not clear if this was a works car entered in Williams' name, but what is clear from this picture is that the circuit of Juan Lapin was not surfaced and must have made it difficult to average nearly 50 miles an hour for over 4 hours. Despite an entry for the Rome Grand Prix in a Type 35B in June, he did not appear, so next came the Bugatti Grand Prix at Le Mans, one of a series of 3 sponsored by Bugatti with a new racing car as a prize. From the handicap system it appeared that an unsupercharged Type 37 would have the best chance, so Williams drove his Type 37A without the supercharger, but the handicappers assumed that all the cars were standard, whereas Dubonnet and Rothschild entered highly tuned Type 37s and fooled the handicapper. Williams is seen here sitting on Dubonnet's winning car while talking to a Tory Bugatti. He won his heat and finished 4th overall. His next outing saw a major victory for Williams when he won the Grand Prix de l'Acief at the Commanges circuit in July. For the race he used the Type 35C fitted with road equipment, and he started this handicap race more than 32 minutes behind the first car away. The race was run in front of a large crowd with full grandstands, despite the location in a remote corner of France. After his win, the presidents of the French Sporting Commission and the Automobile Club of France fated the winner. While battling for the lead at San Sebastian in the Type 35C, it caught fire, resulting in an early retirement, but he then went to Monza for the European Grand Prix, where he again showed his mettle, when he led from the start and pulled away from a first-class field, including the greats such as Nuvolari, Varzi and Chiron. It was not to last, sadly, and 30 miles into the race the Type 35B broke a piston ring and retired in a cloud of smoke. But he did have the satisfaction of having set a new lap record, and that on a full fuel load. 1929 was to be a great year for Williams, although he actually competed in very few races. But his career reached its zenith with him winning the inaugural Monaco Grand Prix in a Works Type 35B. It was painted dark green in recognition of Williams' nationality. He always considered himself an Englishman. Seen here during the practice, he had little impression of what was to come. A hard and competitive race awaits him, with the main opposition coming unexpectedly from the hugely powerful but unwieldy SSK Mercedes of Rudy Caracciola, that actually led the green Bugatti on a number of occasions. Despite the pressure, he looked settled and relaxed during the race, although the big white car was never far behind for the first 50 laps. In fact, Caracciola took the lead on lap 30, but Williams got back past him 4 laps later. Sadly, as so often today, the race was decided on pit stops. Mercedes were not as slick as they are nowadays, and they lost around 3 minutes to Williams refuelling and changing 2 tyres. Here Williams chases the Mercedes, which loses out on the tight parts of the circuit, but uses its huge power to make up for time along the straights. It would have been an even more tiring car to drive than the Bugatti, and certainly needed strength to wring the most out of it. By comparison, the Type 35B was almost half the weight, and might have been easier, but it was still hard work. At the finish of the race, the winner will have been elated, but the strain of 100 laps still shows on his face as the adrenaline rush slows down. His mechanic, who had watched from the pits, will no doubt have been relieved that his had been a job well done. After the race, Williams collects his trophies. Suddenly this shy man is a hero, certainly in his adopted France, but he has never received much recognition in England. The Bugatti Owners Club still races annually for the magnificent Art Deco trophy, which was given to the club by Williams's widow Yvonne after the war. Williams had shown that he had both skill and the determination to be considered on a par with the acknowledged stars of the day. But sadly, he has always been overlooked when enthusiasts are talking about the top drivers of that era. His later career and his wartime service should have ensured that today he would be remembered as a hero. But it is only at Monaco that he is celebrated, with a life-size bronze statue of him driving the Type 35B. This cannot be a complete biography of such an important player in motor racing history, so I will close with a brief mention of the last 14 years of his life. After 10 years as Sir William Orpen's mistress, the very wealthy portrait artist made Yvonne a very generous settlement, including 2 houses, his latest Rolls-Royce and a large sum of cash. This paved the way for her to marry Williams, and the couple had homes in both Paris and Le Bourg. His career as a racing driver continued with another win in the French Grand Prix, this time at Le Mans, with a Type 35B fitted with a bolster fuel tank needed because the race was run on a fuel consumption formula. But all the finishers had fuel left at the end of the 4.5-hour race. It had been a long, tiring race in poor conditions, but Williams looked relaxed and happy at the end, and no doubt Ettore was very pleased too. He also ran in the Tourist Trophy, driving a Works Type 43, but this retired with a broken oil pipe. Williams had a quiet year in 1930, only competing in 3 races, but in 1931 he was back to his winning ways with a Works Type 51, winning both the Belgian Grand Prix and at Le Bourg, an event he again won in 1932 and 1933, on both these latter occasions using the fast but somewhat unwieldy Type 54. It is surely a measure of the high regard that Ettore had for Williams that when Bugatti debuted the new Type 59 at the 1933 Spanish Grand Prix, he included the Englishman in the team, along with Varzi and Dreyfus, with Devo as the reserve driver. Sadly, Williams crashed the new car in practice, bending the front axle but injuring himself, and the accident was almost the finish of his career. If more proof were needed of Williams' bravery, he travelled to England at the start of the Second World War and served for a while as a driver to a general, before joining the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, and he was dropped into France as an agent. Having recruited his former teammates Vimille and Benoist, he worked in France for over a year, but was eventually captured in 1944, tortured and imprisoned at Sachsenhausen. He was later executed near the end of hostilities. A brave man who died for his country, a nation that has done nothing to recognise this hero other than a name on a plaque in Brookwood Military Cemetery, almost as though ashamed of this French domiciled Englishman who had done so much in his short life.